where mention of God have been made, and his praise glorified, glorified, glorified.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sarah Hosney, for that beautiful, beautiful prayer. Ladies and gentlemen, always a pleasure to see each and every one of you. Welcome back to another episode of God Passes By. As per usual, I'm going to try and do a quick recap of our last session so we all know exactly where in the story we are. So we know that Baha'u'llah had visited the fort of Sheikh Sabasi, this first fort of the three major battles. Baha'u'llah had gone there and he basically looked around the fort and he'd tell people, maybe reinforce this bit, that bit, make some changes. He also, whilst there, he said to the people, go and get Qaddus. Qaddus, who was under house arrest essentially, go and get him. I believe he was in Sari. And he said to him, go and get him. You need to get him involved. Then we know Baha'u'llah was later on at a time, he was going to revisit the fort. And the idea was to go back to the fort because he was pushed by some people to go back. On the way, he stops and tarries for a while. There they are caught. And they say to Baha'u'llah, who are you with? Who are these four people? You know, the four of you, the rest of it. And Baha'u'llah says, look, I'm the one in charge here. I'm the leader. As a result, he gets the bastinado. Here in Amul, this is where it happens. He gets the bastinado, and there are 4,000 people watching. He's then taken to the house of the governor, where a mob basically besieged, and they start throwing stones and causing all sorts of issues. We learn that in the fort of Sheikh Tabasi, in this area here, Qaddus reveals the Sad of Samad. Now, the Sad of Samad is basically 6 times the length of the Holy Quran and is in honor of Baha'u'llah. The Bab reveals the date in which Baha'u'llah would come in what's known as the Lohe Hurufat. When the Bab was in Chehreg in this second prison, remember the first one was Marco up here, the second one was in Chehreg, he revealed this tablet in honor of Dayan, where he talks about this word Mustagas. Now, Mustagas is the one you call in extreme peril, and the value, the abjad value of Mustagas is 2001, huge. So some people think that what the Bible is saying, that Baha'u'llah won't come until 2001 years after the start of his revelation. If they were to read on, they would find that actually he says, no, you must take this Mustagas and you must divide it by Allahumma. Allahumma meaning come to my aid. So you must take this and you must divide this. Take Mustagas, divide it by Allahumma, and as you see, it's 2001, the abjad value of Mustagas, divided by 106, which gives us 19. So it's clear and evident here, he's saying that Baha'u'llah, him whom God shall make manifest, will come in 19 years from the start of his revelation. The Bab then gives to Mullah Baqir this star tablet, which has 360 derivatives of the word Baha to give to Baha'u'llah. We then hear that Baha'u'llah is in charge and the chief instigator, once the Bab is martyred, to take his body from Tabriz, bring him to Tehran, and then move him around. We know that over a period of 50 years, this body eventually ends up in Mount Carmel in Haifa. Baha'u'llah also was the one who went to Karbala. Remember, the Bab, after he completed his pilgrimage, when he came back, he was meant to be going to Karbala. This was the plan. By way of Kufa, he would go to Karbala. However, this is not what happened. As a result, some of the sheikhis, some of the people, some of the Babis there who believed in the Bab were utterly disappointed. This test was too big for them, and there were some issues in Karbala. His Holiness Baha'u'llah traveled to Karbala, went there for a while and tried to smooth these things out and try and explain to the Babis what was going on and try and win back the support. We know that Mirza Aga Khan Nouri is the new prime minister that's taken over. He took over from Mirza Taghi Khan, and whilst in Tehran, he wanted to try and facilitate this coming together of actually the Babis and the government, because he could see this divide, see this split, and he says to Baha'u'llah, he calls him in and says, Baha'u'llah, you are so good, you are wasted as just a Babi, why don't you come and work for the government? I'll give you a really good job. Baha'u'llah obviously very politely declines. So Mirza Aga Khan Nouri is the prime minister who's trying to do this. We know that he has a brother called Jafar Guli Khan. Now, there was an attempt on the life of the Shah by some crazies Sadiq Khorasani and Fatullah Ghami, these two crazies who have this attempt on the life of the Shah. What happens is Baha'u'llah is fully aware that he's recognized as one of the prominent Babis. He was staying at the house of Jafar Ghuli Khan, the brother of the Prime Minister, and he decides that he's going to go to Niavaran, and specifically this place called Lavasan Afche, this village to where the military are. And he starts heading there, and he starts going to Lavasan, and he goes in. The brother there in Lavasan Afche is saying, look, don't go, look, I'll speak to my brother, and maybe let's have you move there. Let's try and do something. Let's keep you safe. Baha'u'llah goes to Zarkandeh. He then meets his brother-in-law, Mirza Majid. So while he's with Mirza Majid, he realizes that Mirza Majid is the secretary to Prince Dolgoruki. Prince Dolgoruki is this kind of Russian diplomat who is there, and Baha'u'llah's brother-in-law is serving him. Dolgoruki gets to know Baha'u'llah, falls absolutely in love with him, and actually his daughter is very much enamored with Baha'u'llah and says, look, we will save you. I'm going to say that you are going to be kept safe, and I want to transfer you to the Prime Minister. Muhammad Shah had found out. Because of the Haji Budala, a guy named Haji Ali Khan had told Muhammad Shah, the king, and the king said, right, he sent some people to go and get Baha'u'llah. Now, the Russian diplomat, Dolgoruki, says, no, I'm not going to give him to you. Look, he's the trust of Russia. We're going to look after him. Actually, I'll give him to the Prime Minister, to Mirza Agha Khan Nouri. The Prime Minister, however, is very much scared to take Baha'u'llah. Even though he doesn't have issues with Baha'u'llah now, he did in the past, there was some jealousy over things. He says, look, the mother of the Shah is accusing me, the Prime Minister, of being involved in his attempted death. She's also accusing you. If you come and stay with me, what's going to happen? This is going to be crazy. It's not going to look good for us at all. Baha'u'llah then goes from Niavaran, where he was in Zarkandeh. He's taken and he's marched all the way to Tehran, the Siachal, the Black Pit. They take him, they take off his turban, they take off his shoes, they march him in the hot, blistering sun. According to Google, it's 5.5 hours walk there, and then he's put inside this horrendous prison. While he's there, we hear some of the stories that he mentions in this letter epistle to the Son of the Wolf, where Baha'u'llah describes it of 4 months imprisoned, going down 3 flights of stairs, that there were 150 thieves. Baha'u'llah in the epistle to Son of the Wolf explains some of the conditions, how he was 4 months in prisons, there were 3 flights of stairs, there were 150 thieves. Abdul Baha then it goes on to explain that there were 3 days where Baha'u'llah had no food, there were heavy chains that actually bent and caused long-lasting issues with him, that he describes it as a filthy, damp place, and he goes on to talk about the fact that Baha'u'llah was poisoned whilst there. Abdul Baha in Esselmont's book, Baha'u'llah in the New Era, then goes on to explain that he sees Baha'u'llah in the prison yard, and he sees that his beard is unkept, he's bent, and he can hardly walk. His clothes are ripped, such were the conditions. So really we get an interesting insight into the conditions of the Siachal. Of course, they were meant to be horrendous. We then discuss very briefly the fact that the king one day brings chana kebab for them, says this is a gift from the king. Baha'u'llah then returns this saying, give this back to the king, this is a gift from his king. Even though he's a prisoner, he's really setting the tone as to who he is and the majesty and the glory in which he has. We then go on to learn about the story of this very sweet, very powerful Tahireh. Tahireh was from Ghazvin. Now her father was Haji Mullah Salih Baraghani. Tahireh had a few different titles. Her family used to call her Zarin Taj, crown of gold. They used to call her Zakiyeh, virtuous. Sayyid Kazim had given her a title, which was Garata Aini, solace of thine eyes. And then we know that Baha'u'llah eventually calls her Tahireh, the pure one. Her original name was Fatimah Baraghani. She was a powerhouse, and she spent some time, we learn a little bit about this, in Karbala. And while she's in Karbala, she's involved in writing these epistles, these dissertations, all sorts of things, just expounding the truth of the Qa'im. We know that's on the anniversary of the blessed Imam Hussein, who was martyred. We have this day called Ashura, where people cause pain to themselves to try and mourn his death. That day happened to fall on the same day as the birth of the Bab. And she decides to actually celebrate the birth of the Bab and not go through with the previous traditions, which caused a lot of uproar. But she was saying, obviously, there's maximum respect for His Holiness Imam Hussein, absolutely revered. But this is the course of action that she took. She spoke to many Sunni, to many Shiite, to Christians, Jews, And in her conversation, she'd confound their argument and was this huge, powerful clergywoman, essentially, that was able to share all of these things. We then know she goes on to Kermanshah, and in Kermanshah, she has an audience with princes, again, clergy, government officials. She then has the Surah Kawsar, the Surah of Divine Plenitude, which was revealed for Wahid, the holiest man in Tehran, remember when he was down in Shiraz. So she has the Surah Kawsar, and she not only translates this, but she also reads this out, basically. She reads it out and shares it with people in Kermanshah. She was a fearless woman. You wouldn't stop at anything. In fact, in Kermanshah, the governor of Kermanshah, him and his family declared. We then also know that the Qayyum al-Azma, the commentary on the Surah of Yusuf, or the Surah of Joseph, which was written again in Arabic, as with 95% of the Bab's works, she's the one who translated that in Farsi for a lot of the Persian readers, so that they were able to read as well. So this incredible scholar that we have, this incredible, powerful scholar. We also hear of this beautiful story that takes place in Baha'u'llah's house. She's there and she tells Wahid off. She's sitting there with Abdul Baha as a young boy on her lap. And Wahid is giving this wonderful discourse on the comings, the signs of the coming of the new manifestation. He's revealing all of this, and Tahirih just says, look, it's great talking, but get up, get to action, do something. So it's this really interesting interplay between the two. Tahirih, who's 6 years younger than Wahid, and she's a woman, and she's, in this day and age, sort of telling Wahid what to do, this wisest man, and Wahid doesn't have an issue with it, actually. Wahid's like, yeah, okay, fair enough, let's do this. We know that she speaks to, there's 7 different conferences where she speaks to the deputies of the Prime Minister, and she really expounds the teachings of the faith. And this really is the thing that essentially signs her death warrant. She is in Badasht, the conference of Badasht, that she's the one who took the veil off and signalized this break from some of the previous laws of Islam. Again, very much following Islam, very much part of Islam, but this new rulebook had basically been brought in that adds to the holy faith of Islam. We then hear about her martyrdom. Tahirih, unfortunately, is going to be martyred. 3 days before her martyrdom, she's found in her room, and she's staying with the mayor's wife. And the mayor's wife goes in and she says, look, I'm going to be martyred in 3 days. The room is redolent with perfume. She is wearing a white dress, a wedding dress. She says, leave me alone. She says, when I go there to be martyred, I want your son to come with me and take this silk neckerchief, and I want to be hanged with this. Sure enough, this comes to fruition. She goes, Aziz Khan as-Sardar is the drunk chief executioner. He's there with all his people. They're absolutely drunk. They want to strangle her. The son of the mayor says, please, can you strangle her with this silk neckerchief? This happens. She's then thrown into this well with stones thrown in and all the rest of it. So it's a very beautiful, moving thing. We hear more things about Tahirih, the fact that Tahirih was to be compared with Hypatia. So I don't know if any of you did any research on that. This Neoplatonist, this character of old, this phenomenal woman who our scholar, Dr. Khazeh, spoke briefly about. We know that she's said to be the first suffragette to have suffered this martyrdom. Actually, the first suffragette there, talking about the equality of men and women. When she was martyred, she said, you can kill me, but you can't stop the emancipation of women. Such a powerful, powerful lady. We then hear of certain tributes by various people around. We have Lord Curzon from England who talks. We have Gobineau, the French. We have a British writer again, T.K. Cheney, with all these phenomenal things that they say about Tahirih. We have the mother of the Prime Minister of Austria who says, I want to basically try and emulate her. So all these things showering rain upon. E.G. Browne, the Orientalist, the Cambridge Orientalist who met Baha'u'llah, he turns around and says, had the Babi revelation no other claim to greatness, this was sufficient that produced the heroine like Gorat Alain. Say, even the fact that we have Gorat Alain, that was enough. It's incredible. So we hear all of these things about Tahirih, but unfortunately Tahirih has now passed on.
The fierce gale of persecution that had swept Baha'u'llah into a subterranean dungeon and snuffed out the light of Tahirih also sealed the fate of the Bab's distinguished amanuensis, Sayyid Husseini Yazdi, surnamed Aziz, who had shared his confinement in both Maku and Sharik. A man of rich experience and high merit, deeply versed in the teachings of his master and enjoying his unqualified confidence, he, refusing every offer of deliverance from the leading officials of Tehran, yearned unceasingly for the martyrdom which had been denied him on the day the Bab had laid down his life in the barrack square of Tabriz. A fellow prisoner of Baha'u'llah in the Siachal of Tehran, from whom he derived inspiration and solace, as he recalled those precious days spent in the company of his master in Azerbaijan, he was finally struck down in circumstances of shameful cruelty by that same Aziz Khan Sardar who had dealt the fatal blow to Tahereh. Another victim of the frightful tortures inflicted by an unyielding enemy was the high-minded, the influential and courageous Haji Suleiman Khan. So greatly was he esteemed that Amir Nizam had felt, on a previous occasion, constrained to ignore his connection with the faith he had embraced and to spare his life. The turmoil that convulsed Tehran as a result of the attempt on the life of the sovereign, however, precipitated his arrest and brought about his martyrdom. The Shah, having failed to induce him through the Hajibud Dawleh to recant, commanded that he be put to death in any way he himself might choose. 9 holes at his express wish were made in his flesh, in each of which a lighted candle was placed. As the executioner shrank from performing this gruesome task, he attempted to snatch the knife from his hand that he might himself plunge it into his own body. Fearing lest he should attack him, the executioner refused and bade his men tie the victim's hands behind his back, whereupon the intrepid sufferer pleaded with them to pierce 2 holes in his breast, 2 in his shoulders, 1 in the nape of his neck, and 4 others in his back. A wish they complied with. Standing erect as an arrow, his eyes glowing with stoic fortitude, unperturbed by the howling multitude or the sight of his own blood streaming from his wounds, and preceded by minstrels and drummers, he led the concourse that pressed round him to the final place of his martyrdom. Every few steps he would interrupt his march to address the bewildered bystanders in words in which he glorified the Bab and magnified the significance of his own death. As his eyes beheld the candles flickering in their bloody sockets, he would burst forth in exclamations of unrestrained delight. Whenever one of them fell from his body, he would with his own hand pick it up, light it from the others, and replace it. "Why dost thou not dance?" asked the executioner mockingly, "since thou findest death so pleasant?" "Dance," cried the sufferer. "In one hand the wine cup, in one hand the tresses of the friend. Such a dance in the midst of the marketplace is my desire." He was still in the bazaar when the flowing of a breeze, fanning the flames of the candles now burning deep in his flesh, caused it to sizzle, whereupon he burst forth addressing the flames that ate into his wounds. "You have long lost your sting, O flames, and have been robbed of your power to pain me. Make haste, for them, your very tongues of fire, I can hear the voice that calls me to my beloved." In a blaze of light, he walked as a conqueror might have marched to the scene of his victory. At the foot of the gallows, he once again raised his voice in a final appeal to the multitude of onlookers. He then prostrated himself in the direction of the shrine of the Imam Zadeh Hassan, murmuring some words in Arabic. "My work is now finished," he cried to the executioner. "Come and do yours." Life still lingered in him as his body was sawn into 2 halves, with the praise of his beloved still fluttering from his dying lips. The scorched and bloody remnants of his corpse were, as he himself had requested, suspended on either side of the gate of Na, mute witnesses to the unquenchable love which the Bab had kindled in the breasts of his disciples.
Such a touching story. Said Hussein Yazdi, who was the amanuensis of the Bab, who was with the Bab in both Marcour and in Chehreg, in these areas here. He's been martyred by the same person who martyred the beloved Tahereh, Aziz Khan Sardar. So he is also now being killed. Now you have to understand this attempt on the life of the Shah has basically been the trigger point in which the Babis could then become attacked. This is where the Holocaust begins. They now have their excuse to finally try and put out the flame and trying to kill the Babis. So unfortunately, Sayyid Hussein Yazdi has been murdered. We then go on to the story of Haji Salman Khan. Now, Haji Salman Khan was this remarkable character who even previously, he was known as a Babi, but the Prime Minister didn't want to kill him, didn't want to do anything with him because he was a very well-respected guy, incredibly well-respected, and they thought this would cause problems. So they just kind of let it be, and they're like, okay, it'll be okay. However, this attempt on the life of the Shah was the straw that broke the camel's back. He gets the Hajib al-Dawla, Haji Ali Khan, to try and persuade him to recant. He says, look, try and recant from your faith, recant. Haji Sulaiman Khan is having absolutely none of this. He basically is then going to be martyred. He's going to be put to death. And it's here that he chooses how he wants to be martyred. He says to them, please, can you put 9 holes in my body? 9 holes. Of course, 9 for the number, the abjad value of the number Baha for Baha'u'llah. He says, please take these 9 and just put them in me. And the executioner was so kind of disgusted by this. He's like, I don't want to cut these holes. Like, what's this way of dying? Let's go from a nice, like, shoot a cannonball through you, or just a bit of strangling, something a bit more normal. He's like, no, I want everyone to see, such is the love. He's so scared to do this that Haji Sulaiman Khan says, give me the knife, let me do it myself. And the executioner was a little bit kind of worried here, and he's like, no. And they get his hands and they tie it behind his back. They carry out his wishes. They put 9 holes, like 2 in his chest and the nape, and then 4 in his back, and they start doing this exactly where he'd asked. They put the 9 holes, and then they get the candles and they stick the candles inside the body. These holes obviously were not put in places that were going to kill. The idea wasn't to kill. The idea was to try and torture and to try and set an example. The executioner, as I said, was too scared to carry this out, but it ends up happening eventually. Now, as he would walk along, he would hear the burning of his flesh and the flickering of the light from the flesh of his skin, the fat of his skin. And he would delight. He would just jump around almost and start dancing. And one of the candles would fall out. What would he do? He would try and bend over and get the candle and stick it back inside himself. Then the executioner said, well, look, why don't you dance, seeing as you're so happy? And he goes, dance? I would love to dance. I would love everyone to see the glory of what's happening, the glory for my love. It's then going to end with him being cut in 2 at the gate of Noor, so that everyone in Tehran can see what's happened. And this is what he's asked for. He said, I want everyone to see the love I have for His Holiness the Bab and for what's about to happen. So this incredible person, Haji Sulaiman Khan, just absolutely mind-blowing. This deals with his martyrdom of him there.
Why at this point does the number 9 already have a significance?
Many of the surahs, dearest Dave, start with some disconnected letters, like Aleph, Lam, Mim, Sad. Now there is one surah particularly loved and respected for the last 14 centuries, and it starts with 2 letters, Ta, Ha. Ta, Ha. The letter T and the letter H. Now, throughout these 14 centuries, they believed, the Islamic world, that these 2 letters encapsulate something very, very precious. But nobody knew. And in fact, there are many authors who call themselves Taha. Many boys abroad, they're called Taha, just out of love, out of pure love for these 2 letters. But the letter T stands for 9. The letter H stands for 5. 9, 5. Very soon after the inception of the Babi dispensation, people deduced that 5 is the Bab, because in the Abjad, the Bab is 5. The question is, what about the 9? Now, in this interval post the attempt on the life of the Shah, this is called the inter-revelation years, between the revelation of His Holiness the Bab and the revelation of His Holiness Baha'u'llah. Someone like Sulaiman Khan, who was really an incredible, heroic soul, well recognized in Tehran circles, he would have deduced that 9 is the symbol of the next manifestation. He had met Baha'u'llah. So from about that time, the number 9 was attaining, prominence, significance. And that is why in the most holy book, Baha'u'llah addresses Tehran and says, O land of Ta. The land of Ta would be the start of the letter Tehran, but it also means the land belonging to Baha. And it goes on like this and so on. So that at that time already, dearest Dave, there was a feeling that that promise, that messianic promise, as they say, the academic people say messianic promise, but we say the promise of all the revelations, or as the Guardian says in God Passes By, the cynosure of all the revelations. The Baha'i faith is the cynosure of all the dispensations. So already they knew, Dave, that there's a lot left in the number 9. And the other thing that somebody like Sulaiman Khan would know, that every chapter of the Quran starts with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, except chapter 9. So in other words, in chapter 9, because you've already got 9 there at the top of the chapter, that chapter 9 has within it the name Baha, because it's already 9.
Thank you very much, dear Fazil.
The Bab says, fix your gaze on the world order of Baha. So even in the Bab's writings, there are references actually to Baha. Not most of the believers didn't understand that reference, but it was there in the Bab's writings.
Thank you very much, Nabil. Actually, Nabil, while you're there, if you wouldn't mind just carrying on reading for us, that'd be fantastic. Unless there's any other comments or questions. Great question, Anisa. Thank you.
The violent conflagration kindled as a result of the attempted assassination of the sovereign could not be confined to the capital. It overran the adjoining provinces, ravaged Mazandaran, the native province of Baha'u'llah, and brought about in its wake the confiscation, the plunder, and the destruction of all his possessions. In the village of Takur, in the district of Nur, his sumptuously furnished home, inherited from his father, was, by order of Mirza Abu Talib Khan, nephew of the Grand Vizier, completely despoiled, and whatever could not be carried away was ordered to be destroyed, while its rooms, more stately than those of the palaces of Tehran, were disfigured beyond repair. Even the houses of the people were leveled with the ground, after which the entire village was set on fire. The commotion that had seized Tehran and had given rise to the campaign of outrage and spoliation in Mazandaran spread even as far as Yazd, Neriz, and Shiraz, rocking the remotest hamlets and rekindling the flames of persecution. Once again, greedy governors and perfidious subordinates vied with each other in despoiling the innocent, in massacring the guiltless, and in dishonoring the noblest of their race. A carnage ensued which repeated the atrocities already perpetrated in Neriz and Zanjan. My pen, writes the chronicler of the bloody episodes associated with the birth and rise of our faith, shrinks in horror in attempting to describe what befell those valiant men and women. What I have attempted to recount of the horrors of the siege of Zanjan pales before the glaring ferocity of the atrocities perpetrated a few years later in Neriz and Shiraz. The heads of no less than 200 victims of these outbursts of ferocious fanaticism were impaled on bayonets and carried triumphantly from Shiraz to Abadeh. 40 women and children were charred to a cinder by being placed in a cave in which a vast quantity of firewood had been heated up, soaked with naphtha, and set alight. 300 women were forced to ride 2 by 2 on bareback horses all the way to Shiraz. Stripped almost naked, they were led between rows of heads hewn from the lifeless bodies of their husbands, sons, fathers, and brothers. Untold insults were heaped upon them, and the hardships they suffered were such that many among them perished. Thus drew a close to a chapter which records for all time the bloodiest, the most tragic, the most heroic period of the first Baha'i century. The torrents of blood that poured out during those crowded and calamitous years may be regarded as constituting the fertile seeds of that world order which a swiftly succeeding and still greater revelation was to proclaim and establish. The tributes paid the noble army of the heroes, saints, and martyrs of that primitive age, by friend and foe alike, from Baha'u'llah himself down to the most disinterested observers in distant lands, and from the moment of its birth until the present day, bear imperishable witness to the glory of the deeds that immortalize that age.
The whole world is Baha'u'llah's matchless testimony in the Kitab-i-Iqan, marveled at the manner of their sacrifice. The mind is bewildered at their deeds, and the soul marveleth at the fortitude and bodily endurance. Hath any age witnessed such momentous happenings? And again, hath the world since the days of Adam witnessed such tumult, such violent commotion? Methinks patience was revealed only by virtue of their fortitude, and faithfulness itself was begotten only by their deeds. Through the blood which they shed, he, in a prayer referring more specifically to the martyrs of the faith, has significantly affirmed, The earth hath been impregnated with the wondrous revelations of thy might and the gem-like signs of thy glorious sovereignty. Ere long shall she tell out her tidings when the set time is come. To whom else could these significant words of Muhammad, the apostle of God, quoted by Qudus while addressing his companions in the fort of Sheikh Tabarsi, apply if not to those heroes of God, who with their lifeblood ushered in the promised day? Oh, how I long to behold the countenance of my brethren who will appear at the end of the world. Blessed are we, blessed are they, greater is their blessedness than ours. Who else could be meant by this tradition called Hadith-i-Jabir, recorded in the Kafi and authenticated by Baha'u'llah in the Kitab-i-Igan, which in indubitable language sets forth the signs of the appearance of the promised Qayyim. His saints shall be abased in his time, and their heads shall be exchanged as presents, even as the heads of the Turk and the Daylamite are exchanged as presents. They shall be slain and burned and shall be afraid, fearful and dismayed. The earth shall be dyed with their blood, and lamentation and wailing shall prevail amongst their women. These are my saints indeed. Tales of magnificent heroism is the written testimony of Lord Curzon of Kettleston. Illumine the blood-stained pages of Babi history. The fires of Smithfield did not kindle a nobler courage than has met and defied the more refined torture-mongers of Tehran. Of no small account, then, must be the tenets of a creed that can awaken in its followers so rare and beautiful a spirit of self-sacrifice. The heroism and martyrdom of the Bab's followers, will appeal to many others who can find no similar phenomena in the contemporaneous records of Islam. Babiism, wrote Professor J. Darmesteter, which diffused itself in less than 5 years from the end of Persia to another, which was bathed in 1852 in the blood of its martyrs, has been silently progressing and propagating itself. If Persia is to be at all regenerate, it will be through this new faith. One of those strange outbursts, declares the well-known Orientalist Professor E.G. Brown, of enthusiasm, faith, fervent devotion, and indomitable heroism, the birth of a faith which may not impossibly win a place amidst the great religions of the world. And again, the spirit which pervades the Babis is such that it can hardly fail to affect most powerfully all subjected to its influence. Let those who have not seen disbelieve me, if they will, but should that spirit once reveal itself to them, they will experience an emotion which they are not likely to forget. The truth of the matter is the answer which Abbas Quli Khani Larijani, whose bullet was responsible for the death of Mullah Hussein, is reported to have given a query addressed to him by Prince Ahmad Mirza in the presence of several witnesses, is that anyone who had not seen Karbala would, if he had seen Tabarsi, not only have comprehended what there took place, but would have ceased to consider it. And had he seen Mullah Hussein of Bushriye, he would have been convinced that the chief of martyrs, Imam Hussein, had returned to earth. And had he witnessed my deeds, he would assuredly have said, "This is Shimr, come back with sword and lance. In truth, I know not what had been shown to these people, or what they had seen, that they came forth to battle with such alacrity and joy. The imagination of man cannot conceive the vehemence of their courage and valor." What, in conclusion, we may well ask ourselves, has been the fate of that flagitious crew who, actuated by malice, by greed or fanaticism, sought to quench the light which the Bab and his followers had diffused over their country and its people? The rod of divine chastisement, swiftly and with unyielding severity, spared neither the chief magistrate of the realm, nor his ministers and counselors, nor the ecclesiastical dignitaries of the religion with which his government was indissolubly connected, nor the governors who acted as his representatives, nor the chiefs of his armed forces, who, in varying degrees, deliberately or through fear or neglect, contributed to the appalling trials to which an infant faith was so undeservedly subjected. Muhammad Shah himself, a sovereign at once bigoted and irresolute, who, refusing to heed the appeal of the Bab to receive him in the capital and enable him to demonstrate the truth of his cause, yielded to the importunities of a malevolent minister, succumbed, at the early age of 40, after sustaining a sudden reverse of fortune, to a complication of maladies, and was condemned to that hellfire which, on the day of resurrection, the author of the Qayyimul Asma had sworn would inevitably devour him. His evil genius, the omnipotent Haji Mirza Aghasi, the power behind the throne and the chief instigator of the outrages perpetrated against the Bab, including his imprisonment in the mountains of Azerbaijan, was, after the lapse of scarcely a year and 6 months, from the time he interposed himself between the Shah and his captive, hurled from power, deprived of his ill-gotten riches, was disgraced by his sovereign, was driven to seek shelter from the rising wrath of his countrymen in the shrine of Shah Abdul Azim, and was later ignominiously expelled to Karbala, falling prey to disease, poverty, and gnawing sorrow, a piteous vindication of that denunciatory tablet in which his prisoner had foreshadowed his doom and denounced his infamy. As to the low-born and infamous Amir Nizam, Mirza Taqi Khan, the first year of whose short-lived ministry was stained with the ferocious onslaught against the defenders of the fort of Tabarsi, who authorized and encouraged the execution of the 7 martyrs of Tehran, who unleashed the assault against Fahid and his companions, who was directly responsible for the death sentence of the Bab, and who precipitated the great upheaval of Zanjan, he forfeited, through the unrelenting jealousy of his sovereign and the vindictiveness of court intrigue, all the honors he had enjoyed, and was treacherously put to death by the royal order, his veins being opened in the bath of the palace of Fin, near Kashan. Had the Amir Nizam Baha'u'llah is reported by Nabil to have stated, been aware of my true position, he would have certainly have laid hold on me. He exerted the utmost effort to discover the real situation, but was unsuccessful. God wished him to be ignorant of it. Mirza Agha Khan, who had taken such an active part in the unbridled cruelties perpetrated as a result of the attempt on the life of the sovereign, was driven from office and placed under strict surveillance in Yazd, where he ended his days in shame and despair. Hussein Khan, the governor of Shiraz, stigmatized as a wine-bibber and a tyrant, the first who arose to ill-treat the Bab, who publicly rebuked him and bade his attendants strike him violently in the face, was compelled not only to endure the dreadful calamity that so suddenly befell him, his family, his city, and his province, but afterwards to witness the undoing of all his labors, and to lead in obscurity the remaining days of his life, till he tottered to his grave, abandoned alike by his friends and his enemies. Hajibu Dodale, that bloodthirsty fiend, who had strenuously hounded down so many innocent and defenseless Babis, fell in his turn a victim to the fury of the turbulent Lurs, who, after despoiling him of his property, cut off his beard and forced him to eat it, saddled and bridled him, and rode him before the eyes of the people, after which they inflicted under his very eyes shameful atrocities upon his womenfolk and children. The Sayyidul Ulama, the fanatical, the ferocious, and shameless mujtahid of Barfurush, whose unquenchable hostility had heaped such insults upon and caused such sufferings to the heroes of Tabarsi, fell, soon after the abominations he had perpetrated, a prey to a strange disease, provoking an unquenchable thirst and producing such icy chills that neither the furs he wrapped himself in nor the fire that continually burned in his room could alleviate his sufferings. The spectacle of his ruined and once luxurious home, fallen into such ill use after his death as to become the refuse heap of the people of his town, impressed so profoundly the inhabitants of Mazindaran that their mutual vituperations, they would often invoke upon each other's home the same fate as that which had befallen that accursed habitation.
After things kick off in Tehran and these horrible deaths that we spoke about, Haji Suleiman Khan and all these things happen, that this spreads to the area of Mazindaran. So we know that it goes up here to Mazindaran, and this is the place where the faith had really kicked off the most powerful place. And they go and they destroy the house in Tarkur. Remember, Baha'u'llah's father had a house, this palatial sort of house that he had that we'd previously spoken of. So Tarkur is just over here. So they go in and they basically destroy everything, and this is all done by none other than Mirza Ali Talab Khan. So he's the one who's behind this, who's the nephew of Mirza Agha Khan. He goes in there, destroys everything, steals everything, and then basically sets things on fire, completely ruins it. We know that then things spread to Yazd, Neriz, and Shiraz. Neriz is down here, and Yazd is over here. So things basically start to spread. And Nabil says that what happens now is worse than what even happened in the battles of Zanjan. Zanjan, remember, where we had Hujat and Zainab. So horrible atrocities had taken place there. Now things are even worse. He then goes on to describe how 40 women and children were put inside a cage with firewood around them and naphthalene, and basically were set alight on fire, alive, burnt alive. We know that 200 heads of the Babis were cut off. They were put on lances, and they went from Shiraz to Abadeh. Shiraz is down here, and Abadeh is slightly north to here. So they marched them from there to there. We know that 300 women, 2 by 2, were put on unsaddled horses and forced to ride almost naked. I think they were heading to Shiraz, and they would see the decapitated heads of their brothers, of their fathers, of their husbands. Such were the horrible, horrible atrocities that had taken place. And Nabil talks about this being worse than what's previously. It's like the pen couldn't describe it. Baha'u'llah then, I think, in the Kitab Iqan goes on to say that the whole world marveled at the manner of the sacrifice of the Babis. Such were they giving up their lives. Remember, at any point, they could have turned around and they could have said, look, okay, I'm not in this anymore. But they all stood so steadfast in things. We know that Abbas Quli Khan, who was the person who shot Mullah Hussein, remember when Mullah Hussein's horse gets trapped in the rope, he tells the prince, if you've seen what I would have saw, you would have thought this was like the scenes of Karbala. Of course, Karbala, when His Holiness Imam Hussein is brutally murdered. You would have also thought, if you were seeing Mullah Hussein, that he was Imam Hussein had come back. It was absolutely atrocious, the things that had taken place. It goes on to talk about the punishments received by some of these people who were against the Babis. It goes on and explains, the first one being Haji Mirza Aghassi, the prime minister, if you remember from the start, who brought about much of the persecutions, who stopped the Bab meeting the Shah. Had that have happened, who knows what would have happened. He wrote to some of the ulamas in Isfahan, banning them to hang out with the Bab. He said to the Imam Jomeh, who was very much a fan of the Bab in Isfahan, he said, don't hang out with them, try and stop everyone hanging out with them. So he caused a lot of problems. It was Haji Mirza Aghassi, who was also the prime minister, who was his cousin, I believe it was, Ali Khan, who was the chief prison warden in Markou, who was the governor of Markou. So a lot of problems he caused. We know that a year and 6 months later after this, he basically loses all power and he languishes and he's in Karbala, basically. Completely turns into nothing. We then learn about the next prime minister, Mirza Taghi Khan. Now, Mirza Taghi Khan was the one who was behind the horrific happenings that took place in Fort Sheikh Tabarsi, in Neriz, in Sanjan, the 7 martyrs of Tehran that were killed, including the Bab's paternal uncle, Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali. He's the one who's absolutely clamping down on all of these things. Haji Mirza Aghassi, we know the previous prime minister, he's one of the people who's called the Antichrist of the Babi revelation, because he perhaps knew that the claim of the Bab could be true, but he was just worried about preventing the king and the Bab meeting. The king, the sovereign, ends up going against Mirza Taghi Khan, and in an area called Fin, close to Tehran, his veins are slashed open. He's in this bath and he's murdered there. We know that Mirza Ali Khan Nouri, the prime minister who was in charge after the attempt on the life of the Shah, ends up in strict surveillance in Yazd. So he loses his power, things start to really fall down. So he ends up in Yazd and under strict surveillance. We then learn about Hussein Khan, the governor of Shiraz, again, the one who had the Bab ordered to be slapped in the face and caused so many problems and had the Bab kidnapped, and then the cholera outbreak happened. He ends up with nothing again. And he ends up, I think, begging to be put back in power, but he's ignored. The Sayyid Ulama, who was the person here in Babul and Bafarush, this is the one who was very discourteous to Mullah Hussein. Godus had sent Mullah Hussein actually to speak to him. He didn't want to listen, absolutely not interested. Then when Mullah Hussein is coming across with his black standards, remember from Mashhad, he's marching with his black standards, and eventually they have these 202 people that end up joining. It's outside Bafarush that the Sayyid Ulama, who's there like the leading cleric, basically rips open his shirt and says, we must kill the Babis, and he gets the women, all the inhabitants, to come with spears, guns, whatever they can. It's here that 6 of the people that Mullah Hussein's with get shot. Mullah Hussein says 1 more must die, the 7th one is killed, who is going to be sacrificed for Ali Muhammad, the name who's the Bab. He has 7 letters in his name. He says 7 must be killed, and this is where this battle before Fort Sheikh Abbas takes place. So Sayyid Ulama caused so many problems. He's also the one who was responsible for the death of Godus, who when Godus eventually goes back to none other than to Babul, to Bafarush, this area here, that he has Godus murdered. A horrendous guy. So this guy ends up getting some disease where he has unquenchable thirst. He's just constantly thirsty, and these severe chills that he'd experienced. And he was absolutely destroyed, and his house ends up becoming the refuse tip for the entire place. Can you imagine that? In Babul, his house, this almost palatial sort of house, he has this incredible house, ends up being the refuge tip. He falls so much. So it just goes through a few people, Mahmud Khan as well, who end up having their downfall. So this is what it's going through. All these people that committed these crimes, what's happened?
Ruhiya Khanum Amatul Baha once said, about the priceless pearl. In the priceless pearl, the God passes by is a summary of about 200 books. So it's incredibly, incredibly rich. And Miss Anisa read these passages. They're all incredibly rich. There's one passage that I'd like to just with great humility highlight, and that is the passage which starts with saying, to whom else could these significant words of the Prophet of Muhammad refer to? That the Prophet Muhammad, because I know that this particular paragraph, Dave, has resulted in a lot of Muslims becoming Baha'is. He says here, that's right, the Prophet of God, the Apostle of God, he says, I wish I could see my ikhwan, my brothers. Everybody around him, all the disciples by then said, why are you so keen to see your brothers? We are here. He says, oh no, Antum Ashabi, you are my disciples. The true brothers are the ones who are coming with the Qa'im, with the Bab. They are my true brother. We are blessed, they are blessed, but greater is their blessedness. So you see the contrasting between the previous dispensation, where the followers were disciples or of the prophet figure, and the followers of the Bab, who are all the brothers of the manifestations of God in the past. It's an incredible. And then the beloved guardian does something else. You see, he's very good at interpretation. You know, we have twin interpreters. So the guardian interprets this. Who else could be meant by the Hadith Jabir? You know, your favorite book of Hadith, that is Bihar al-Anwar. This Hadith is there from that book, dearest Dave, that he says the disciples of the promised one, their heads will be exchanged, they do this, they'll be slain, they'll be burnt. And then he says, the lamentations, these are the saints. These are truly the saints. Now, why does this affect those whose heart is pure? Is that surely, if the promised one is to come with incredible material prosperity, armies, sovereignty, 10,000s of soldiers, 10 millions of... Who would dare to behead his followers? Who would dare to treat their women like this? So clearly, if a Muslim meditates on this, dearest Dave, that the disciples of the promised one will not be accorded earthly glory, heaven, you know, it's a spiritual sovereignty. It's a spiritual meaning, the coming of the Mahdi and the Qa'im. Just meditating on that. And that is why the guardian, the beloved guardian, puts this here, and it's also from the Book of Certitude. The other thing, the guardian does an incredible thing. He says, what happened to the Babis, what happened to the followers of Baha'u'llah and Siyar Shah? The fires of Smithfield could not evoke. Now this is very relevant to you because you're a southerner, Dave. Smithfield is just outside Bart's Hospital. What was happening in Smithfield in 1555 is that we had a queen in this country called Queen Mary. She wanted to stamp out Protestants, Reformation. So they had the Protestants burnt there every Friday by the stake. And so there's a book called Fox's Book of Martyrs about all the martyrs of the Reformation. So the guy, Lord Curzon, says, the fires of Smithfield did not kindle a courage nobler than was met by the torture mongers of Tehran. In other words, if Christianity has a proof that what happened in Smithfields, you know, outside Bart's Hospital in London, look at what happened in Tehran.
Very blessed we are to have scholar Dr. Khaza Fanana-Pazir with us. Let's go from here.
Mahmud Khan Kalantar, into whose custody Tahirih had been delivered before her martyrdom, incurred 9 years later the wrath of his royal master, was dragged feet first by ropes through the bazaars to a place outside the city gates, and there hung on the gallows. Mirza Hassan Khan, who carried out the execution of the Bab under orders from his brother, the Amir Nizam, was within 2 years of that unpardonable act subjected to a dreadful punishment which ended in his death. The Shaykh-ul-Islam of Tabriz, the insolent, the avaricious, and tyrannical Mirza Ali Asghar, who after the refusal of the bodyguard of the governor of that city to inflict the bastinado on the Bab, proceeded to apply 11 times the rods to the feet of his prisoner with his own hand, was in that same year struck with paralysis, and after enduring the most excruciating ordeal, died a miserable death, a death that was soon followed by the abolition of the function of the Shaykh-ul-Islam in that city. The haughty and perfidious Mirza Abu Talib Khan, who disregarding the counsels of moderation, given him by Mirza Aga Khan, the Grand Vizier, ordered the plunder and burning of the village of Thakur, as well as the destruction of the house of Baha'u'llah, was a year later stricken with plague and perished wretchedly, shunned by even his nearest kindred. Mir Ali Khan, the Shujul-e-Mulk, who after the attempt on the Shah's life so savagely persecuted the remnants of the Babi community in Neriz, fell ill according to the testimony of his own grandson and was stricken with dumbness, which was never relieved till the day of his death. His accomplice Mirza Naim fell into disgrace, was twice heavily fined, dismissed from his office, and subjected to exquisite tortures. The regiment, which scorning the miracle that warned Sam Khan and his men to dissociate themselves from any further attempt to destroy the life of the Bab, volunteered to take their place and riddled his body with its bullets, lost in that same year. No less than 250 of its officers and men in a terrible earthquake between Ardabil and Tabriz. 2 years later, the remaining 500 were mercilessly shot in Tabriz for mutiny, and the people, gazing on their exposed and mutilated bodies, recalled their savage act and indulged in such expressions of condemnation and wonder as to induce the leading mujtahids to chastise and silence them. The head of that regiment, Agha Jan Beg, lost his life 6 years after the Bab's martyrdom during the bombardment of Muhamra by the British naval forces. The judgment of God, so rigorous and unsparing in its visitations on those who took a leading or an active part in the crimes committed against the Bab and his followers, was not less severe in its dealings with the mass of the people, a people more fanatical than the Jews in the days of Jesus, a people notorious for their gross ignorance, their ferocious bigotry, their willful perversity and savage cruelty, a people mercenary, avaricious, egotistical, and cowardly. I can do no better than quote what the Bab himself has written in the Dalayal-e-Sabeh, 7 Proofs, during the last days of his ministry. Call thou to remembrance the early days of the revelation, how great the number of those who died of cholera. That was indeed one of the prodigies of the revelation, and yet none recognized it. During 4 years, the scourge raged among Shia Muslims without any one grasping its significance. As to the great mass of its people, Nabil has recorded in his immortal narrative, who watched with sullen indifference the tragedy that was being enacted before their eyes, and who failed to raise a finger in protest against the hideousness of those cruelties. They fell, in their turn, victim to a misery which all the resources of the land and the energy of its statesmen were powerless to alleviate. From the very day, the hand of the assailant was stretched forth against the Bab. Visitation upon visitation crushed the spirit out of that ungrateful people and brought them to the very brink of national bankruptcy. Plagues, the very names of which were almost unknown to them except for a cursory reference in the dust-covered books, which few cared to read, fell upon them with a fury that none could escape. That scourge scattered devastation wherever it spread. Prince and peasant alike felt its sting and bowed to its yoke. It held the populace in its grip and refused to relax its hold upon them. As malignant as the fever which decimated the province of Gilan, these sudden afflictions continued to lay waste land. Grievous as were these calamities, the avenging wrath of God did not stop at the misfortunes that befell a perverse and faithless people. It made itself felt in every living being that breathed on the surface of that stricken land. It afflicted the life of plants and animals alike and made the people feel the magnitude of their distress. Famine added its horrors to the stupendous weight of afflictions under which the people were groaning. The gaunt specter of starvation stalked abroad amidst them, and the prospect of a slow and painful death haunted their vision. People and government alike sighed for the relief which they could nowhere obtain. They drank the cup of woe to its dregs, utterly unregardful of the hand which had brought it to their lips, and of the person for whose sake they were made to suffer.
It continues with going through the people that had tried to oppose the Babi revelation. We know that Mahmud Khan and Kalantar, this this governor that Tahirih was with until she was martyred. Remember, the wife of the Kalantar was very loving towards Tahirih, but he basically was the one who was in charge of Tahirih, and then she was sent to her martyrdom. He ended up dragged through the streets by his feet and then was hung in front of everyone. We know the Sheikh al-Islam who beat the Bab when the Bab was in Tabriz. If we go to Tabriz here, if you remember when the Bab was taken to Tabriz and he sits and he says, I am the promised one, and he makes his declaration, they then say to him, right, okay, we'll prove it, and he starts revealing certain things, and they start trying to basically be rude to him and chat him, and the Bab is then, by William Cormac, is examined, and all these things happen. They decide to give the Bab some punishment before sending him back to the prison, who will then return for his martyrdom. The Sheikh al-Islam says, right, I am going to have him bastinadoed. No one really wants to bastinado him, so the Sheikh al-Islam himself says, right, I'm going to do it myself. And 11 times bastinado is the feet of the Bab's feet being put up, tied to a log, and then being whipped. Horrendous, painful punishment. This Sheikh al-Islam, he ends up losing his job. He ends up getting paralyzed and just dies a horrible, bitter death. In fact, the title of Sheikh al-Islam that had existed actually became defunct. The man in charge of the regiment, remember the 2nd regiment, who was then brought in to kill the Bab, we had Samkhan Armani, Sam Khan the Armenian, and his regiment who did the first shooting, and then the Bab's body disappears. They then refuse to do it, and then they bring in Khamzeh, who his regiment does it. We know that 250 of those soldiers die by a wall collapsing on top of them. The other 500 commit mutiny, and then they are all lined up and they are shot and killed in a similar manner to which the Bab was martyred. In the Dalail al-Sabeh, the 7 proofs, the Bab says how many people died of cholera in Shiraz. Now remember, again, when Shiraz happened and the Bab was being basically persecuted in Shiraz, and then they kidnap the Bab and then they try and take him, but Hussein Khan's now run away. We know that cholera was spreading through the streets. And the Bab says people didn't realize what was happening. When you try and mess with this plan, God has his way of dealing with people. And then he says that this whole attack and persecution against the Babis, it brought near bankruptcy to the country. It brought around plagues that were not even heard of, except in some obscure book with dust on top of it. The prince felt it, the peasant felt it, everyone. It was just unrelenting, which is really interesting when you look at what's going on with COVID-19 right now. I wonder, is it this case of people in the world aren't listening, that the world's going astray, that something's happening to try and bring us back in? I don't know. I'm not saying it is, I'm not saying it isn't, but it's quite interesting that this thing where God seems to have been lost, this craziness happening. Maybe it's something different. There was this famine that's taking place. So basically the entire conditions of Iran now are taking a downfall as the attack, and this is what the Guardian's saying. And I love this last line, I absolutely love it. It says, they drank the cup of woe to its dregs, utterly unregardful of the hand which had brought it to their lips. Such beautiful imagery. That brings us to the end of that chapter. The next chapter we're going to go into is going to deal with the 2nd period. If you remember, there's 4 periods. The first period being about the period of the Bab, ministry of the Bab. The 2nd about the ministry of Baha'u'llah. The 3rd, Abdul Baha. And then we talk about the Covenant. So it's very interesting. We've now finished that entire 1st period. One of the 4 periods has been completed, ladies and gentlemen. It is an overview. Remember, these are the salient features that the Guardian said he's bringing out. So a lot of these stories can be found in the Guardian and Balyuzi's book, The Bab, and other books, but predominantly a lot of this is taken from the Dawnbreakers that Nabil had put together in the Guardian in 1932, had turned into this book, The Dawnbreakers, which was a gift to the Baha'is of the West. And as previously discussed, we know that the Persian version of this is taken from the English. So we're very lucky to have this gift from the Guardian. So you can just put your name at the top and say to whatever your name is from the beloved Guardian with regards to that book.
You noticed in the passage, dearest Dave, that Yvette read, how much the beloved Shoghi Effendi connects the consequences of rejection, and obviously the higher level than rejection, oppression, higher level than oppression, persecution, higher level than that, martyrdom of these early believers, and how much that correlates in the vision of the Guardian to the consequences upon humanity. That seems to be a very, very strong theme in the writings of the beloved Guardian. From one of the first ones, which is in the book called World Order of Baha'u'llah, Dave, he says, because we are now in the weekend of the crucifixion of Christ, that on the last day, or the last week before Jesus Christ was crucified, he said, O Jerusalem, you forgot. You didn't pay attention. You didn't heed, David, to the time of your visitation. The beloved guardian loves this word, the time of your visitation. This is from Luke's Gospel, chapter 19, verse 44, for those who have time. Luke, which is the third Gospel of Christianity, chapter 19, verse 44, Jesus Christ addresses those people who are living there, about 1 million people ultimately in Palestine at that time, that don't forget, Dave, the time of your visitation. Now, visitation is not like now they're saying stay at home, don't visit. Now, that's a different word. This is called just staying at home and don't visit. But the biblical word visitation, Dave, means punishment. There is this connection between humanity and God's response. There is a verse in the Quran, and the Bab quotes it often. If a man does one atom of injustice to the divine plan, he will receive that one atom as consequence. In this narrative that Yvette read, you could see the beauty of the Guardian connecting events. And now, of course, in my nightmares, I think, what will happen to the people of my own native land after 41 years and the destruction of the House of the Baal and the martyrdom of 280 people, including these ladies in Shiraz? We've got to be very, very careful about the time of our visitation.
Thank you so much for your input. As always, thank you to everybody who's read, everybody who's put input in there, everybody who's just part of this group. It's, again, gives us so much energy, and it's such a pleasure to be able to do this. So we, as I said, will be going on to the next period, which is the Ministry of Baha'u'llah. Very exciting stuff that's going to happen. We're making very good progress with this, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you all for being on this journey. And now if we could go on, please, to the devotional part to get some of those spiritual atoms flowing, that'll be fantastic. Thank you very much.
In his name, the exalted, the all-highest, the most sublime. Glorified art thou, O Lord my God, O thou who art my God and my master and my Lord and my support and my hope and my refuge and my light. I ask of thee by thy hidden and treasured name that none knoweth save thine own self, to protect the bearer of this tablet from every calamity and pestilence, and from every wicked man and woman, from the evil of the evildoers and from the scheming of the unbelievers. Preserve him, moreover, O my God, from every pain and vexation, O thou who holdest in thy hand the empire of all things. Thou truly art powerful over all things. Thou doest as thou willest and ordainest as thou pleasest. O thou King of kings, O thou kind Lord, O thou source of ancient bounty, of grace, of generosity and bestowal. O thou healer of sicknesses, O thou sufficer of needs, O thou light of light, O thou light above all lights, O thou revealer of every manifestation, O thou the compassionate, O thou the merciful. Do thou have mercy upon the bearer of this tablet, through thy most great mercy and thine abundant grace, O thou the gracious, thou the bounteous. Guard him, moreover, through thy protection, from whatsoever his heart and mind may find repugnant. Of those endued with power, thou verily art the most powerful. The glory of God rest upon thee, O thou rising sun. Do thou testify unto that which God hath testified of his own self, that there is none other God besides him, the Almighty, the best beloved.